Hello and welcome to the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings. This is the story of 66, a celebration of the brand new album from the legend that is singer, songwriter and musician Paul Weller. This new series features podcast conversations with many of the huge talents that have been involved in the creation of Paul's 17th solo studio album. What I hope is that these podcasts give you a deeper insight into the creation of the new LP and that sheer joy of the creative process. And ultimately, it all comes back to the songs. What you'll hear about this LP, probably more than any other, is an album packed full of collaboration. Welcome to the story of 66. On this episode of the podcast, we hear from somebody whose connections with Paul Weller go back over 50 years. His childhood best mate, yes, the fella that he originally created the jam with, Steve Brookes, back on the podcast. I'd encourage you to listen to episode 53 of our original series for his full story. This time around, we're talking 66. Now, Steve has played on Weller albums right the way through from 22 Dreams to now. Paul's also returned the favour on his. We've seen many live sets, acoustic live sets, where Steve has played alongside Paul Weller, including tail end of last year up in Liverpool. I was lucky enough to go along, so we're going to chat about that. And we'll talk about this wonderful song on the album 66 that Steve plays on, a track called I Woke Up, where you'll hear Steve on beautiful acoustic guitar with Richard Hawley on lap steel, Mr. Weller playing bass and acoustic, and these absolutely stunning orchestrated strings from Hannah Peel, the Britten Symphonia. Just beautiful. It's a wonderful song. It opens side 2 of the album. There's a couple of lovely little revelations about series 1 of the podcast as well on this one. So listen very carefully. You're going to love this. Let's get into it. Steve Brookes, thanks for joining me.
Not at all, mate. Nice to speak to you.
Lovely to see you. Last time we caught up, we were just a couple of days away, weeks away from the album release, Tread Gently.
Yeah.
Which was, I mean, you must have been pleased with the reaction that got. It's a lovely LP.
Yeah, again, it's like when you do these like sort of self-published kind of things, and it's a very small audience, it's not a huge thing. You get a few nice comments and Paul says some nice things about it. And it's more about, interestingly enough, good comments from 2 or 3 important people means more to me than 10,000 people saying, they like it, One of the brills I got was that podcast you did with Danny Thompson when he mentioned my album and said how much he'd like to have played on it. And I just thought, oh, bugger me, wouldn't I ever love it to play on it, I was so made up with what he said about the album because it is such a phenomenon in the music business, and to get a compliment from someone like him, that really it was like more than anything else, really, I don't know if we probably didn't, because during the lockdown, we might have done actually, because I was due to do the Albert Hall with Paul when lockdown occurred. Danny was going to be playing bass with us. So apart from being obviously thrilled to play the Albert Hall with Paul, to have Danny Thompson on it as well. And we were just about to start the final rehearsals with Danny and whatever and Ben. And it all went pear-shaped because of COVID, and unfortunately, I think Danny's now, he's not going to be playing anymore, he's sort of retired. And
oh man, that's good. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
That would have been a real thing, But the fact that he said such nice things about the album was enough for me, really, I
love the fact that you'd have been listening to it as well, listening to the podcast, and obviously not knowing that was going to happen, that he was going to say that, and suddenly that popping up, that's a delight. I love that.
Here's one that you did on that series. There's a lot I haven't listened to, but I've listened to quite a few, and that was definitely one of my favourite ones. All aside the fact that he mentioned me, but just the character that he is, I met him down at the barn one day, and it was just so much fun talking to him about John Martin and that, and it was great.
What I wanted to touch on was the Liverpool gig with Paul Weller last year. There was this lovely charity gig up in Liverpool, St Michael's Church, a wonderful venue. I traipsed up on the train to see this because I wanted to experience this gig, and it was a wonderful lineup with people like Catherine Williams and John Power and so forth. And how soon did you know you were going to be involved in that with Mr. Weller?
It was only about a couple of months before that he mentioned it, and I already had a gig in for that night, only in a pub. But I said, well, let me see if I can switch it round. And I did manage to switch it round, and I just thought, and I sort of said to him, because it was a charity job, I thought, I've got to drive all the way to Liverpool and, probably pay for an hotel and whatever. He said, oh, don't worry about that. He said, we'll cover all that, So I thought, well, yeah, we'll come and have a go at that. And we actually did we had a lot of fun. just driving up in the van and whatever, rabbiting away about old times and just talking about what old blokes talk about,
Well, what's the old blokes? I mean, most old blokes I know talk about fishing and things like that, but you've not got that in common.
No, we didn't do fishing, no. Talking about music and listening to tunes and, you touch on the subjects of approaching old age. And now you're sort of coping with it and and it's quite interesting how the both of us share similar insights to it, It was really good fun and we got up there and obviously, Jez. Jez is a great guy to have around, he's just always up and he's good fun and very attuned to what Paul needs, So like when we were driving up there, Paul said, it takes a couple of hours to get to Liverpool. I knew. I mean, I drove up to the Lake District a little while ago and I thought, no, that's 4 or 5 hours on a Friday to Liverpool. And Jez said, counting in the coffee and the fag breaks, he said it could be probably 6,
So what were you in a big transit and Jez is driving and the two of you are up front sat on the seat?
Yeah, Paul's got a sort of small sort of tour bus that they use for transporting the band around. And when they do things like radio and stuff, so they don't have to carry much kit, they've got a cargo sort of bit in the back. It was a bit of fun and Jez was driving and, and we all sat there taking a mickey out of each other. Really.
As you do, yeah. Now, the gig itself was lovely. That venue was just utterly beautiful. The acoustics were wonderful. It was just before Christmas as well, so we all had that kind of Christmassy vibe about us, right?
Yeah.
How long are you in rehearsals for that type of gig?
Not long enough, in fairness. It was a little bit sort of, there was a few little moments, but I think we did about 10 or 12 tunes, 10 tunes probably it was.
It was 10. I've got the set list here. Look, Jez gave me the set list here, which was, and songs that you'd played with Paul before, things like Gravity, you'd played on Mayfly, the song originally anyway. So but there were a couple of new songs, right?
Yeah, no, there were a few others that I hadn't played before, so obviously I had to learn them. And the big problem with it is it's all right for him to make mistakes, but it's not all right for me to make mistakes. You know what I mean? When you're the side guy, you need to be really on it. Everyone says, it looks quite easy, but it was hours and hours and hours of work to practice it up to a decent sort of level. And then we had one little rehearsal down at the barn, and that was it, really. So it wasn't heavily rehearsed, Different if you're doing a tour. Obviously, when they're doing a tour, they'll spend a week doing final rehearsals, and then they're going to go out and they're going to play it over and over again, So it's a different sort of thing to just doing a one-off,
Yeah, you got one shot. And actually, I think it was Paul who made the mistakes. You didn't. You were a seamless man. But Paul had a couple of false starts and he went again, or he forgot the words and things like that, didn't he?
Yeah, I've made a couple of fluffs. But the one I was quite nervous about was the new one off the album, a song called I Woke Up, which when I originally did a part for that at the beginning of last year, Paul had given me some ideas that he wanted a sort of Baroque classical guitar sort of thing on it. And I did it on classical guitar. And I made up this part. But it was actually technically, it was quite a difficult thing to do. I have a habit of doing that, sort of stretching myself to do the best I can. But then it makes it a task that you have to live up to, So that was the one I was most nervous about. And I pretty much nailed it on the night, which was really sort of, that was the one. Once I've got that one out of the way,
you could breathe again. Well, we'll talk about the album 66 in a second, that track actually. But there were songs like Bostle was on there, which again, you played with Paul. I think you played on the Jawbone album doing that one as well. But this wonderful cover version too. I started a joke with Catherine Williams singing with you as well.
Yeah. Again, Paul sort of slung that in towards the end. He's also got another habit of sort of like giving you a set list, and then about 3 days before a gig, he'll say, "Oh no, we're going to do this one now. We're going to do this one." And I've got a new song I've just written I want to try out, He did that to me once before when we were doing the George Ezra gig up at the Union Chapel. We were only doing 4 songs and I'd rehearsed them back to front, and he phoned, and the gig was on a Monday night, and he phoned me on the Saturday and said, I've got a new tune. And I said, Paul, I'm doing a gig on the Isle of Wight. I've got another gig Sunday on my way back. And then I'm with you on Monday. I said, I am not going to have time to learn a new song, mate. I'm sorry.
You're on your own. You can do it, Paul. Yeah.
But, so we stuck to the original set. But the one we did with Catherine, the Robin Gibb song, he just, again, what he normally does is just makes a little recording on his phone and says, this is the idea I've got for it. And he sort of said, maybe you could do a little sort of bass part on the guitar. And I came up, it's quite a simple sort of song, just came up with a little arpeggio that he liked. And so we went with that. Again, it wasn't something that was heavily worked on. So it was all a bit slung to. And Catherine, had to sort of like stick her bit, because she's recorded that song, but obviously she was singing a harmony to Paul in a key that, you know, might not have suited her, I don't know, but, you know, she did terrifically well to sort of do it on the spot.
What you end up with are these types of gigs, and most gigs now, but particularly these types of gigs, is so many people grab their phones out. And I don't know if you're seeing that where you are from your point of view, just a sea of phones filming it.
Yeah, no, you do, obviously, but it's actually quite handy because I had my phone at the side of the stage to record it, and there was a bloody music stand that was sort of stuck right. So this music stand had sort of blocked out half of what I ended up with, you know. So someone else had recorded it and stuck them on YouTube. And I just said, yeah, great. You know, like they were quite
good quality. Some of them were really good quality. Yeah, really good sound quality and whatever, wasn't it? There's a little bootleg of it. I don't know if you've seen that. There's a little bootleg being shared, like audio bootleg of it being shared.
Yeah, well, you know, it's like also the guy that we sort of followed up with, his name is Glenn Walworth, I think. It was on YouTube on a channel called Brighton 59. I'm pretty sure was the YouTube sort of channel that's his channel. And he was kind enough to sort of say, look, I know there's a couple of new tunes on there and I'm not going to put those up until they're out. I thought was really proper. So he held those back, which was good. I imagine once the album's out, he'll put them out. But
that's nice. So, yeah, that's respectful, right? Yeah. There's a song, Early Morning Rain, which Paul Wood covered on the Studio 150 album, which, I mean, it sounded brilliant with the two of you playing that. It's just absolutely brilliant. I get the impression that was a song that you would have known anyway and probably played.
Yeah, I do that one, but yeah. I do a totally different version, Paul. We based it around the Studio 150 version. I do actually play that on gigs, so that was quite a straightforward one to do. So.
How does that differ from your point of view? How do you play that differently, Steve?
Just a bit more laid back. Probably Paul's is closer to the Gordon Lightfoot one, and I just do it more as a sort of laid back thing with slightly different chords. It's like a lot of tunes. I try and sort of, if I'm doing a cover, I try and make it my own, because when you play on your own, just a guitar and vocal, you have to try and get the essence of the song and bring it forward, you know. It's quite an interesting process because there's often songs that I think, I'll never be able to do that on acoustic guitar. I recently started doing Say a Little Prayer, the Burt Bacharach song, which I never, even in the past, ever thought, that just never would work on an acoustic guitar. But then I heard a version by Leanne LaHavers doing it with just her on guitar, and she's a terrific guitar player.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
And I just thought, you know what, I reckon that might be doable. And now, when I play it now, and it's just one of the most popular songs I play. But again, it is obviously very versionized because it's just me and an acoustic guitar.
I like that idea, though, that you've got to find your into the song, and it means something to you. It's not, we're not karaoke, right? That's the point.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, it's an interpretation, you know, and it sort of comes from that jazz, you know, like the jazz players always can actually deconstruct a song, you know, and do it that way. But that's the extreme sort of version of it. But I quite like it when I hear other people covering songs in their own way. I do, you know, I think it's quite an interesting way of doing it.
The one thing I was going to ask you about that we didn't talk about last time at all, and actually, as you say that there about the jazz stuff, was so Paul in the new year did this. I mean, they called it a podcast. It's not a podcast. The last podcast he did was a proper podcast. I don't know if you've heard of it. You know, Desperately Seeking Paul. Anyway, he did this Blue Note.
I've got to say, I thought he
bless you.
So relaxed. And I'm so glad you got him in at the end, you know, because at the beginning, the word was, when you first started doing it, you know, and everyone was like, oh, go careful with that one, you know, it's all hands off, you know, and, you know, and I said, well, I said, I've got nothing to lose by doing it. So obviously I did it. And then when I said to Paul, I said, that guy, I said, I'll tell you what, I said, he's really got his research right. I said, you should really think about doing that. And he said, nah, he said, I'm not going to be doing that, you know, and eventually, obviously, he came round. So, and I thought it was terrific. I listened to it at Christmas and I really enjoyed it. It was like a real good little Christmas present. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, bless you, man. That means I've just had my Danny Thompson moment that you were talking about earlier. Thank you. That means a lot, man.
I really did. And Charlie Farley's one as well was great. Clary, Mooney, you know, it was like really, they were all really good. I thought they all really came across well. You know, and the level of affection for Paul and the respect for what he does, you know, is without being brown nosy. You know, I think it's nice to see it. You know, he deserves it, and I think when he came on and did it with you, I just thought it sounded so natural. It was really good.
Nice one. Thank you, mate. All right. Well, this other podcast that you did, it wasn't a podcast, was his 85th anniversary, the Boat Pod it was called, and it was a Blue Note 85th anniversary. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to ask you, because Blue Note, I hadn't realised this, but you're really into Blue Note, aren't you?
In a way, I'm probably more into like the more accessible kind of jazz. Miles Davis and the Adley Brothers. The stuff that where it still retains a certain, like the melodic side of it. I've listened to a fair bit of Blue Note stuff, and it's a great vibe. Yeah, I mean, it's fabulous.
Is that a connection you have with Paul? You talk about, is that part of the conversation in the van?
No, funny enough, not really. He sort of went through his Blue Note discovery, I think, at the time of obviously the Style Council and that. I think that was when he sort of, got into it. And I was a bit later to the party, but we still came to it from different directions, not sort of introducing it to each other. But it's just that classic sort of jazz sound. There's an album that Cannonball Adderley made, which had Miles Davis on. And there's, I think it's called Something Else, the album. There's a 10-minute version on there of Autumn Leaves. And I'm not joking. It's one of the most magnificent bits of music of the 20th century. It really, if you get a chance to check it out.
I'm going to check that out straight after this. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
It's just magical. So the jazz connection, it's like all music, I suppose, very subjective. It's a personal thing. You either dig it or you don't,
Right, let's talk 66. So the new Paul Weller album. Last time we chatted, you'd been on the most recent album, the two number ones, so Fat Pop and On Sunset. We had you playing on Baptiste and Walking on Sunset and failed on Fat Pop. So this isn't a new thing, you playing on a Paul Weller album. And fingers crossed, third in a row in terms of number one. But you play on the song I Woke Up, which we mentioned earlier, acoustic guitar. So talk me through that and how Paul got you involved in that song.
As he often does, he'll just record it at home on his phone and send it across to you and say, look, this is a new tune and I've got an idea that I'd like you to do such and such, such and such. And then he'll maybe give you a couple of ideas of what he's looking for. And then you expand on that really and put your own thing together. And that was what I did with that. And the thing about that also is that when you pitch up at the studio and put your bit down, they might use 2 bars or they might use all of it. You don't know. You rarely ever get that they use all of it. So when I done it in the studio, he seemed to be pleased with it on the day. And then as sort of time progressed, he kept sending me different mixes with it. And it was pretty prominent in there, and I thought, oh, well, this is good. If it stays like this, it'd be great. And then it got a couple of months down the line. He said, oh, we're going to put strings on it as well. He said, and we're going to Abbey Road to do it. So you'll have to come up and have a listen when they're putting the strings on, 25-piece string section. But I was away and I couldn't go up. And,
no, you missed the Jolly Boy out into Abbey Road.
Yeah, I'd love to have been up there for that, but we were away. So I was in France, so I couldn't make it. And obviously the string part, to a certain extent, sort of built around my guitar part as well. So that was a bit of a thrill. And I think the whole thing it's a terrific song, of course, that goes without saying, but it's really nice. Yeah, no, and it's different. It was different. The first thing I ever played on one of Paul's records was on 22 Dreams on a song called One Bright Star, but you can't really hear it. It's well down in the mix, I think Simon Dine had sort of already made his mind up where that one was going. And once Paul sort of wanted to put this on, he didn't really have a space for it. So he just mixed it in low, and apparently it is in there, but I could never hear it.
Well, you've got the credit. Yeah, you're right. On this album, Paul talked to me about it and said that different to that album is like, if an instrument or a player was going to be on the LP, you needed to hear it. So actually it wasn't about kind of layering things up and it being a kind of big mix. It was actually, you need to hear the individual parts. That was the kind of difference of this album. If it had any theme, that was it, right? Yeah.
A lot more space. If I ever had one criticism or something for my ears that didn't always work, was that very often, I have found in the past different producers that Paul's worked with, it tends to go like there's too much in there for my ears. When I think back to certain tunes where you think when they were halfway through and you used to listen to the demos and that, and you sort of say, so, well, that's done. That for me is done. Yeah, but then they've got a load more on it. And I'd feel like, maybe the first version for me was better. But that's only my personal opinion. And obviously when Paul's finished something, that's when it's finished, But I did say to him when I went for the playthrough back, must have been before Christmas, I went for a playthrough down at the barn. And I said to Paul then, the instrumentation is different from anything you've ever done. There was another one I did a bit on. I can't remember if it's actually on the album or not. They might be on a deluxe or, like they'll be on a B-side or something like that. There's one that he did with Catherine that I played a bit on.
So Quietly.
That's it. Yeah, that one. Yeah, I played a bit on that. And
Danny Thompson plays on that. Do you know that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bit of a...
So it happened, although not in the same room at the same time, right? But yeah.
That's right, yeah. And one or two other bits and pieces. So, yeah, it's great to sort of, go and do these things, because I still consider, I think we touched on it before, I'm just a lucky amateur. I'm only an amateur musician. I'm not a professional career musician. So it's nice to be able to do something at that level and get away with it. Well, I say get away with it, but actually be valued for it.
Get on it. Yeah.
Because it's a high bar that you have to cross, So, it's good.
Yeah, and he's not just putting you on there because you're his mate. That's not it. That wouldn't happen, right?
Not nostalgic at all. That is one thing with Paul, as much as he's a much mellower guy now, he's not a softie. If it's right, it's right. If it's not, it's not, and that's that. So. But
I love the idea that when he's demoing stuff at home and he's playing, he's going, actually, what I can hear on this track is Steve Brookes. This is what this needs. And he's coming to you for that specific thing, because he's not kind of going, come in and you can play on a load of stuff. It's like, actually, this is the thing I need and I know it's from you,
Yeah. And I think all the guests that he's got on that album, the guy that plays the vibes.
Max Beasley, yeah,
because he's an actor as well, isn't he?
Yeah. And he was in the Weller band right at the beginning of the 90s, wasn't he? Yeah.
Oh, right. I didn't know that. Yeah, but it's sublime. It's lovely. It really, and it's perfect for that track, Yeah. And you can hear it. That's the great thing, I think, with this album, the way it's been mixed. When there is a solo or something's going, there's a lot more space in it, which I think in the past has not been the case. Sometimes things get a bit lost because there's so much going on.
It's always a delight to have a Weller album. The fact you're playing on it's a joy as well. In terms of your own music then, so we had that album Tread Gently, like I mentioned. In terms of new music, as you mentioned at that point, I think that there were like 3 or 4 things in the mix for whatever comes next from you as well.
I've got some more tunes. The big problem with it is, Dan, you put so much mental energy and a little bit of finance as well, but you put so much mental energy into making records, there's virtually no income that you actually get back from it. So it is a labour of love. And you do sometimes wonder, like with the last one, you get, someone like Danny Thompson, and Paul was quite positive about it. You think, well, those guys are saying it's all right. If I can't get it across to more than a couple of hundred people, then is it really worth it?
Yeah, and I remember reading a review as well. I can't remember which magazine it was, like a really positive review as well. And it's so hard to cut through with any kind of new, different music these days, unless you're being served up as a recommendation on a streaming platform because of an algorithm and all that. It's just impossible, isn't it?
That, I'm afraid, is what is dictating a lot of it now. That obviously the more you get played, the more you get played. Because I think Ed Sheeran said a little while ago, there's something like between 60 and 100,000 tracks are uploaded to Spotify every day.
Wow. That's just his stuff.
Probably, yeah. And the thing is, how do you make that stand out? How do you make your thing stand out?
And then comes back to things like marketing and, like you say, suddenly you're pumping loads of money into trying to get something heard.
But having said that, there are some smaller artists that develop their own thing. They can go and fill a theatre or a small venue with 200 or 300 people every time they play. I've had this discussion with Paul, actually. I said, that's the level I'd like to get to. If I can get to that level where you've got enough of a following, we could do a little tour of, 6 or 8 dates, and you're going to get a couple of hundred people at each date. That would be great level to get to. But it's really tough just to get there. And the people that have done that, there's loads of people out there that are doing that have never surfaced on TV or the radio or anything like that. But they've got their own following, and it's like an organic thing, which is very healthy. sort of thing. They don't need a record company. They can release their own music, you know, and obviously with the technology now, you can make very, very good records for a fraction of what you used to have to spend, you know. So there is a lot of good stuff coming from that, but it just means that it's a question of finding your audience, you know. And I'm at the wrong end of it now, age-wise, to be appealing to a younger crowd. You know, it's not going to happen. So there's no imperative for me to do it. But once I get myself up to another 10 or 11 songs, I'll probably record them and bang it out there again and see what happens.
Well, when you do, Steve, we'll be here to make sure that we kind of share the word and spread the word for you, man. All right. Hey, look, it's been such a joy to chat with you. Thanks so much for sharing, as always, your memories, your stories about this, and particularly around the making of this song on this album as well. But yeah, cheers, Steve. Really appreciate your time, man.
Nice to speak to you. Keep in touch. Keep it up.
A reminder, if you've enjoyed this episode of the Paul Weller Fan Podcast, you can find a whole box set packed full of brand new episodes. The Story of 66, available now wherever you get your podcasts Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and more, or at paulwellerfanpodcast.com. Whilst you're on my website, why not head into our store, grab yourself a virtual coffee. It's always nice to get a little thanks for this free content. Much appreciated. All available online, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. And here's the big ask. Please do spread the word on social media. So many amazing people giving their time for free to chat to me on these episodes of the podcast. So I'd love it if you could spread the word. Facebook, Instagram, and X. Tell everybody about the story of 66, this celebration of the brand new album from Paul Weller. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.